Welcome to the Victory Through Training podcast presented by the Combined Arms Center Training at Fort Leavenworth, Kansas. Views expressed here are those of the individual and do not necessarily represent the views of the Combined Arms Center, the U.S. Army, or the U.S. government. When asked what CAT does for the Army, I often say that our mission here basically comes down to one important task: keeping soldiers alive. Now that may sound extremely simplified, but really, what we do is make sure that soldiers are trained and prepared to go to war, doing everything we can to make sure the training is as realistic as possible so they can fight and win. An essential part of that realistic training is the OPFOR, or opposing force. During training, the OPFOR represents the enemy forces. Whether we are talking about the OPFOR as a limited-sized group used at home station during a field training exercise, or any of the world-class OPFORs at the combat training centers, or CTCs, the ability of the OPFOR to represent a realistic opposing force is key. The TRADOC Proponent Office, Opposing Forces, or TPO OPFOR for short, under CACT, is the centralized manager for OPFOR capability development. They are the user representative for OPFOR training aids, devices, simulators, and simulations capabilities solutions. They work to help establish realistic operation conditions at home station, centers of excellence, and the CTCs. TPO OPFOR is focused on replicating a realistic OPFOR, and a big part of that right now is CTC Modernization. At the end of March, the Army released an information paper on multi-domain transformation called Army Multi-Domain Transformation, Ready to Win in Competition and Conflict. The paper outlined how and why the Army plans to transform into a multi-domain capable force, able to dominate adversaries in sustained large-scale combat operations by 2035. The paper highlighted the 6 Army modernization priorities that the Army has been working on since the publication of the Army Strategy in 2018 and Army Modernization Strategy in 2019. They include long-range precision fires, next-generation combat vehicles, future vertical lift, network, air and missile defense, and soldier lethality. According to the Army Modernization Strategy, the primary goal is a modernized Army capable of conducting multi-domain operations, or MDO, as part of an integrated joint force in a single theater by 2028, and ready to conduct MDO across an array of scenarios in multiple theaters by 2035. The MDO concept describes how the Army will support the joint force in the integration of all domains of warfare: land, sea, air, space, and cyberspace. So TPO OPFOR is a part of the modernization that is being driven by the move to MDO. OPFOR has a vital role in training at the CTCs, and their replication of peer threat capabilities are vitally important to military readiness. I'm Tisha Swart-Entwistle, the CACT Public Affairs Specialist, and your host for today's podcast. With me today from the TRADOC Proponent Office Opposing Forces is Mr. Robert Munsey, Deputy, and Major Jason Wolfe, Maneuver Branch Chief. Welcome to the podcast, gentlemen. Thank you both for being here today.
Well, thank you very much for having us. We really appreciate the opportunity to come and talk about the different programs.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Absolutely. For this episode 1, we will be talking to Mr. Munsey and Major Wolfe about CTC modernization. So first, I want to start with the TPO OPFOR elevator pitch. What does the organization do, and why is it important?
Well, what the organization performs to the United States Army is basically giving capabilities to the opposing forces, and not so much to make the opposing forces better, but to enable the rotational training unit to meet its training objectives at the CTCs and home station.
Yeah, we focus on building warfighter readiness while bridging the gap between to training modernization. And we do that through leader directives and increasing combat training center excellence. We also do that through combat training center modernization as well as opposing forces replication.
All right. So, modernization. I mean, you've already said the word, I think, twice. It's clear that the Army is currently focusing on modernization efforts. Can you tell me how this affects training and what OPFOR is doing?
Well, as the Army modernizes its forces and then prepares to employ those forces and those capabilities, such as long-range precision fires and next-generation combat vehicles and new vertical lift capabilities, it's very important that the opposing forces enable and help the CTCs model a realistic near-peer threat capability. So the rotational training units, as Mr. Munsey has said earlier, can achieve their training objectives.
Okay. Vertical lift. Can you explain that real quick?
Future vertical lift is not our program of record.
Right.
But what we have to do for the United States Army is provide that threat perspective and threat capabilities to challenge current and future vertical lift. So that is the aviation capability, the helicopters that the Army will get in the future or will look to acquire in the future. So from our perspective, we got to provide that training force the ability to challenge those forces so that they know how to properly employ that future vertical lift.
Okay. I think anybody that's paying attention to what is happening in the Army right now is one of the things that is coming up a lot is multi-domain operations. So can you tell me how modernization relates to that?
Yeah, so what we're trying to do is modernize the CTCs to enable or with capabilities to enable the training unit commanders to meet their objectives. But the Army itself is striving to be MDO ready in a few short years. And with that, they've got to be able to, as part of that, they got to be able to be capable of competing against and defeating in an armed conflict a near-peer threat that can exercise many of the characteristics and fight in the different domains as we are striving to be efficient in going forward. Would you like to elaborate on that, Mr. Munsey?
So while we're doing the coin fight, our near-peer adversaries have looked at what we can and cannot do. And so they have looked at and invested in areas, a couple of those domains, to challenge us or being able to challenge us so the Army to try to prevent us from meeting our objectives. So that's why it's important to have the Army to be able to operate in all 5 different domains of multi-domain operations.
Can you tell me what those 5 domains are?
It's air, sea, land, space, and cyberspace.
So in those domains, what are the peer threat capabilities and why is it so important to recreate them at the CTCs?
So the peer threat capabilities we'll use, for example, cyberspace. Mm-hmm. So at the CTCs, at the maneuver CTCs or DIRT CTCs, that's primarily with the electromagnetic spectrum, so that the peer threats would have capabilities that be able to detect where our forces are at and then be able to prosecute them through electronic means, usually with electronic warfare, jamming through different communication systems, or to be able to jam and prevent us from using our GPS devices. And so basically, you've probably heard a lot of commanders say we got to get back to basics of using a map and compass. And this is one of the reasons why is our adversaries actually have their own version of GPS so that they can literally jam our GPS signals and still operate with their own GPS networks.
Do you have anything to add?
No, that's a great example. We try to endeavor the CTCs and the OPFOR organizations at each of the CTCs to be able to adequately replicate the near-peer threat as it is now, and to look forward in the future as they enhance their formations. We have to be able to be flexible and agile enough to go ahead and set conditions and enable the OPFORs to progress along with the threat. And that only, it goes back to what we said in the beginning, it only helps us build warfighter readiness, as the training units go to these CTCs, and if they're able to compete and against a logical near-peer threat, something that is absolutely replicated along different warfighting functions, it only makes the force better.
Can you explain, talk about the importance of replicating threat formation during training as opposed to just the systems?
Well, yeah. So it goes back to what I just concluded about. If we're able to replicate different types of vehicles and different vehicle capabilities, or vehicles with different capabilities, it forces the staffs at the brigade commander staffs or battalion commander staffs to utilize all their assets to be able to adequately and effectively and hopefully accurately be able to determine where the enemy is in time. And it helps with the assessments as they push back up the information to the commanders. It just brings a real level of realism that in some cases is there, in some cases is not there. But it helps the staffs out, and it just makes the force or the rotational unit a better element and entity when it's all said and done.
So we have talked a lot about CTC modernization, but what are we doing to help units train at home station and prepare for that CTC rotation? I mean, when we talk about TPO Op 4, we are definitely focused on the CTCs, but we are always keeping in mind that we want to support home station. Can you talk a little bit about that?
So those are great points. Some of the stuff we're looking at for home station is what can we do to push that congested and contested electromagnetic environment to home station so that they can have those initial building blocks so before they go to a maneuver combat training center. One of the things that the Army is actively pursuing is what capabilities can we get very quickly to a location at a home station so we can assess those capabilities and then implement those same style of capabilities or maybe something a little bit different at the different CTCs. So we're looking at Joint Base Lewis McChord, JBLM, where a unit is at, and they're very proactive. And so we're looking at different capabilities that we can pull out of the test and evaluation community to pre-position at JBLM to see if those systems can be used at training. So while the units, the battalions, are going through different sets of training or training their companies, in the old days, we used to put units in that fourth iteration in full MOP gear, and they had to execute that same tactical task in full MOP while we're throwing CS. Nowadays, the training those commanders would be putting those units instead of MOP 4 or with MOP 4, also in a contested EMS environment. We're also looking at with D3 SOE with our partners at Space Missile Defense Command, SMDC, putting devices and training the space operation officers on how to utilize devices, but more importantly, how to get those authorizations so that they can utilize those devices that would basically create a small little bubble at that home station. What a lot of people don't understand is that to get authorizations, they actually have to go through several levels and to include the FAA and FCC. So it's not as easy as training on a device that disrupts all the GPSs. There's a lot of authorities that we have to go through from the Army Spectrum, through their command to the Army Spectrum Management Office, and up to notify the FAA so that aircraft is not impeded on flying, or the FCC so we're not blocking important communication signals. But there's efforts ongoing right now to push systems out to those locations. We'll do an assessment over the next FY22 to see if those systems are applicable, or can we get something that is a lower cost and soldier enabled, because we're always looking at things that are soldier enabled.
Can you talk about any other challenges that you might have going forward?
One of the challenges is with a threat integrated air defense or threat IADs. So we came up with something that's sort of like miles for the aircraft at the CTCs. We're going through the process now of getting some of that capability to the CTCs, but we're looking at the next step is what can we do for home station for that like capability. It doesn't have to be the full meal deal, but it has to be some capability so those Combat Aviation Brigade and their elements can train at home stations, so they get some training in a live environment prior to going to the CTCs.
How about some wins? Any recent wins or wins that you think are coming up real soon? I mean, there's always challenges, but it'd be nice to have a win.
So recently, the CSA, the former CSA, General Milley, in January of 2019 said, by May, I want to see a UAV swarm at one of the CTCs. So we worked with the Threat System Management Office, and by May, we got a UAV swarm out at NTC. A lot of people asked us, why are you putting out UAV swarms at the CTCs? Part of it is to show the capability so that it is an actual capability that the threat has. Some of the units have asked us, well, can we interact with it? We don't have a system to actually engage it. And so the Army is making systems to actually engage it. We have to have that capability out there to introduce that complexity to the brigade commander and his staff so that they can take certain actions. They do get credit for taking those actions. One of the things we just got completed working with our brothers and sisters at PEO STRI is to make a micro UAS and CTCIS system that the Joint National Training Capability provided the funding for. So since 2019, the first thing the units identified after we got it out there is, hey, we can't shoot at this with our miles. So we went back. The Joint National Training community was very recognized the problem, provided the funding. The Threat System Management Office worked with the program manager for CTCIS and provided a capability. So they just tested it. It was a successful test. The miles was shot. The threat UAS system blinked the lights to show that it could get a near miss or a hit. That's being implemented in the next generation of threat UAS systems. So by next, hopefully, knock on wood, that this system will be fielded to the CTCs in the near future.
Nice. A lot of this sounds, the UAV swarm, some of the other things, sounds very futuristic. Would you have thought, 20 years ago that this would be something you'd be working on?
Not me. No, I'm a tanker, and I guess my mind doesn't work like that. But it's from my perspective in working at TPO Op 4, it's been awesome to be near those the leads of these programs as they've moved the ball down the road, if you will, and I've actually learned a lot from my position.
So I would have never thought that in 1985, when I was at NTC as a young tanker, that I would be in a position to provide a capability to the CTC. So it's pretty impressive. Awesome.
Well, I want to thank you both for joining me in the studio, for talking about CTC modernization. I think it's on a lot of people's minds. I just want to remind everybody that it was Major Jason Wolfe and Mr. Robert Munsey from TPO Op 4 who were with us today. Thank you both for being here. And that does it for this episode of the Victory Through Training podcast. Please stay tuned for future podcasts and definitely reach out to us. If you have questions or suggestions for future podcasts, we are on Facebook and Twitter at USICAC Training. Thank you. You have been listening to the Victory Through Training podcast produced by the Combined Arms Center Training at Fort Leavenworth, Kansas. Views expressed here are those of the individual and do not necessarily represent the views of the Combined Arms Center, U.S. Army, or the U.S. government.